All right, welcome back. How cool were those plant tours, huh? Right? Can we get a round of applause for plant tours? Like, those were cool, right? I mean, not only do we get to learn about stuff, we actually get to see it applied. And how cool is it to be able to actually see it in application versus just learning about it? So I think just nothing makes this conference such an awesome conference. So one, want to give a shout out to Paperless Parts. You're eating a very healthy, nice lunch thanks to Paperless Parts. So do we have anybody from Paperless Parts in this room? I was looking, I didn't see anybody. No? Well, make sure you stop by the booth and tell them thank you, because we got a really good lunch. We also have to say thank you to APPI Energy, Alliant Group, and ProShop ERP. They're our Silver Plus sponsors, and they're making sure this conference continues to survive and continues to thrive and grow. So just make sure you stop by and thank them. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause as well. Now, Roger's got a bit of recognition to do. Roger, can I borrow you for a minute? We're going to do a little bit of recognition here, sir.
Thanks, Brandon. Yesterday, you thought I got everything out in my little talk to you yesterday morning, maybe my long talk with you yesterday, but I missed a couple things and got called out on it by a couple people, and just being funny, but just wanted to talk about our couple cohorts real quick again. You know, one cohort I didn't mention was our HR cohort. Say that 3 times fast. But anyway, we just had that. It was at the end of September, finished the first week or so in October. It was 4 classes over a 6-week span by our friend Chris Zarnick. Chris led an online training for, recruiting and retaining your employees. And so anyway, I got some feedback from that cohort, and I said, well, I'm going to let you tell the group. So I'm going to ask Alan Ortner. Alan had one of his people from his company join the cohort. So Alan.
Yeah, so we heard Chris Sarnick here at a conference prior, and I actually got his book and I brought it back for Cheryl, my HR manager, and she loved it. And then when I heard they had the cohort, I said, you should do this. I just called her just before lunch to ask her, in her words, how did it go? She said it was fantastic. The tips she got in there, using certain keywords in the ads and everything, have generated more responses for the 2 openings we have right now than she's ever seen before. So she is excited about it. It was great.
Thanks, Alan. It's always good to get good feedback. And speaking of good feedback, when we were having our emerging leader happy hour the other night and enjoying that time together, David come up and spoke to me and just thanking me for the emerging leader cohort. And again, I don't think I could do justice what he told me. So I asked David if he'd just quickly tell you guys what he told me the other night during our session.
Thanks, Roger. So I went through the Emerging Leaders program here for the last 9 months with Mike and Dave. I just wanted to quickly tell everybody about my experience with them. So when I came into this program, I had come from a smaller shop, now working with Grady at Riata, and I learned an absolute ton from these guys that I had no idea about before. So in my previous role, I had been running a shop, very small shop, thought I knew what I was doing, but when I got into this class, I quickly learned that I didn't know anything. And in this last 9 months, I've learned more from these 2 guys about how to run a shop, how to manage my time, how to talk to employees and communicate effectively, learn the styles of the people that I'm working with, and how to tailor what I'm trying to do to communicate with them. And I've just learned an absolute ton from these guys. I'm very grateful, and I would recommend this program to anybody. If you guys have leaders in your companies that you want to embrace and invest in and really grow, these are the guys that you want teaching your people. So just wanted to quickly thank you guys.
Good, David. Thank you. I appreciate that. When he told me that last night, I just go, that's worthy of for you here. And again, we're going to repeat that cohort at next year. So yesterday during the awards, I didn't give out one award that we're going to give out today at lunch. This year, I'd like to start off with this award that's not an annual award, but it's an award given to a member or someone who deserves special recognition on occasion. The President's Award is in conjunction with the nominating team, has selected a person that we wanted to give the President's Award to this year. So what I would ask Mr. John Loesch of Baytar Incorporated, if he had joined me on the stage, please. Got you, didn't I? John, this award is given to you for your longstanding service to NTMA and by consistently demonstrating strong support and active participation both at the local chapter and at the national level. Having served at the highest level of your chapter, you've done so much I had to write it all down, John. Sorry about that. Serving as chapter president, including your chapter as trustee. Your service and support to the national level has been of great value to me personally and to the association and for our industry. You deserve, your desire to develop the next generation leaders has positively influenced the manufacturing industry, and I know your commitment to that. And it's with great honor that we recognized you with NTMA's President's Award. You surprised me. I love you, buddy. You want to say that? Okay. Thanks, buddy. All right, we'll go ahead and eat your lunch, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
So, Roger, you're awesome. I mean, talk about a leader. Roger, I think, does a fantastic job, but it's not just Roger, because there is somebody else here that I just wanted to give a high five to. Juanita, will you stand up real quick and give me a high five? So everyone, if you have not met Juanita, this is Roger's wife. She's here to support him. That's how much this family believes in NTMA. So just, you're awesome. Thank you for being here to support NTMA. So if I can get Omar and Caitlin up here now. So Omar and Caitlin, I've talked to no less than 5 or 6 people who've all told me one of their favorite things about the NTMA conference here is Omar and Caitlin, Omar Nashashibi and Caitlin Sickles talking about what's happening in Washington. So come on up here and give us the inside scoop. They're going to do it in a very fun way, and they're going to give you the chance to ask some questions. So make sure you're writing down some questions while they're talking, and I can't wait.
You see what she just did? She said fun and pointed at me. Keep this fun. Okay, I get it.
I said be fun.
Be fun. Oh, that's even more work. I can keep it fun. Well, no, there's no shortage of anything to talk about from Washington, D.C.
I think of fun.
I know. Caitlin said, we have a lot of time to fill next week. I said, don't worry. Between now and then, someone will give us some content to work with. And I'm pretty sure House Republicans have done that and more.
And that person is Jim Jordan.
I know.
So thanks for having us. We're always glad to be here. I'll show you who we are. I know we've got some new people in the room. Yesterday we had folks stand up if they were first-time attendees. And so for people who haven't met us, we are from the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. That's where I work. My colleague Paul Nathanson and I do strategic communication for NTMA. So we work with media, we work on social media, we push the message of small and medium-sized manufacturers led by NTMA to advance the policy priorities of this organization. And we work super closely with Omar and his colleague John at the Franklin Partnership. I'll let you talk about y'all's work.
In our nonpartisan lobbying firm, we've been working for NTMA. Our primary goal is to represent you all, your industry, and be the voice for manufacturers before the White House, Department of Commerce, Department of Labor, Department of Education, all the different agencies, EPA, OSHA, you name it, and of course, Congress. And that is our goal, is to make sure that your voice, your priorities are being heard and acted upon, and try to make sometimes things a little less bad from Washington, because we can't always make it great.
So we have a lot that we're going to cover today. We'll talk about what's going on or not going on in Congress. We'll talk about workforce issues, which, like Roger showed in the NTMA survey, is still the most important issue to all of you. So we'll talk about that, give you updates on regulatory issues and trade, and then we will, of course, talk about politics. Now, we normally talk about politics at the end of the presentation, but there's too much going on to wait until the end. So let's, from the top, we are 18 days and how many hours?
18 days and about 20 hours now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, who's counting?
Yeah.
Into not having a Speaker of the House. As we were coming up on stage, we wrapped up vote number 3 to try to solidify the speakership for Jim Jordan. It's moving in the wrong direction for Jordan because now he's got 25 against. Vote 1 was 20 against. Vote 2 was 22 against. Vote 3 is 25 against. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, but that doesn't seem good.
A good trend that does not make.
That's not good. So what is going on? What's going to happen? Try to break that down for people.
Well, even just looking at the slide that you're on right now, a 17% approval rating of a Congress that is quite dysfunctional even seems a bit high. I'd love to see what that polling comes down here after we get done with the speaker's vote. I bet you it's even down in half on that point. But as you take a look at this next slide, as we just kind of get framed up of where we are even on the speakership, because it's a job that, who wants it? If it were to be Jim Jordan, take a look at Kevin McCarthy on this list. He was, the third shortest serving speaker in U.S. history. The first guy served for 1 day, he died. So you're not exactly on a great list here. And if it is Jim Jordan or would be somebody else, it probably would end up coming in as the 4th shortest serving because he only would have gone through the next year in the election. So back to your question. What is Jim Jordan trying to do here? What is going on here? Let's just start with the basics. On October 3rd, since then, we have not had a Speaker of the House. What he's done, McCarthy did not resign. What they did is they held a vote called a motion to vacate and consider that the speakership is vacant. So that's what ended up happening on October 3rd. Since then, in those 18 days since, they've tried multiple times to have another speaker. Scalise didn't work. Jordan, strike 3 didn't work. They told Jim Jordan last night it was not going to work. I mean, what were your thoughts? I was speaking somewhere last week, and I pretty much said, all right now you're looking at Scalise and Jordan. And I said Jordan's name, people started clapping. Let that die down. He's not going to be Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
It was always an uphill climb, it felt like.
For sure, and nothing's really helped his case because you have people who are supporters of his, and I mean, he has tried to distance himself from these efforts, but you have folks in right-wing media and other people who are supporters of his calling members, calling their spouses, harassing their offices, that kind of thing, and that has, I think, hardened the people who are opposed to him and prevented other people from coming over to his side. So it's now a really tough situation for him, but he's not, I don't pretend to be a Jim Jordan expert, but I do work with people who are, and the depiction certainly of his personality is that he's not likely to go quietly into the night. So I don't see a world in which he just sort of walks away a la Steve Scalise.
I know, and we always kind of make the assumption that everybody knows who these folks are. And for a little bit of background, Congressman Jim Jordan is from Ohio. He's been in Congress now, I think, since 2007. When he came into town, his big thing was government oversight. They gave him chairmanship of that government reform committee for a number of years. We had worked closely with him on something called the REINS Act and dealing with legislation there. But then shortly thereafter, it pivoted from being focused on legislation to more broader, as happened with many other members of Congress. But he's obviously got quite a strong following. His favorables within certain parts of the Republican Party are quite high. But the challenge is, even before some of the tactics where you literally are getting death threats to your spouse, is saying you need to tell your husband or your wife to go vote for Jim Jordan. That's not going to help. But even prior to that, you had 18 Republicans sitting in districts that Joe Biden won. That's 18. And what do Democrats need to do? Net 5 seats to take the House of Representatives. And I know many people didn't want Nancy Pelosi campaigning in their district, and Democrats would have that issue with Pelosi years ago, but that is nothing compared to what Jim Jordan, you do not want him in any part of New York State. You don't want him in certain parts of California. He can't go to certain parts of Wisconsin. So that's the issue that you've got with this kind of, at the speakership top. Just the numbers and the politics just didn't seem to really align to have him getting there. At least that was just, but he thought he could push his way through.
Yeah, and I think a point that's important for people to understand is that the way we have this set up right now, you have a small but vocal group of people who are really able to hold the entire Congress hostage. Because even before we got to the Jim Jordan situation, the group that ousted McCarthy, who now they're wrestling over control, is not a particularly large group of people, and yet they are able to really grind the whole functioning of Washington to a de facto halt. I mean, business is ongoing, as we'll talk about, but I think that that's a really, it's a part of the message that people have to understand, because it's a difficult thing, I think, to wrap your head around.
But what do they want? That's the issue. There isn't a single unified policy thing that you can give them. And that makes it even harder to negotiate with this block of 20. And that's why, you shouldn't joke, but you are, people are calling this the Seinfeld, what is it, the Seinfeld speakership.
Yeah.
It's about nothing. This literally shutting it down and getting rid of McCarthy, it's been about nothing. It's been about personalities. It's not like they're saying these are the budget cuts we want in unity. It's not that they're saying this is the opposition, here's the legislation. It's just more about personalities, and they're upset that McCarthy cut a deal that was inevitable in June. You need Democrats to govern. When Democrats are in the majority, they need Republicans to govern. Basic facts you cannot change. You need 60 votes in the U.S. Senate if the opposition controls the other chamber and the White House. Will never change. And in the near future, by the end of this decade, maybe, you will not have a party that has 60 votes in the U.S. Senate. Just will not. The numbers are not there. So no matter what happens in the House, whether they're liberals or far-right conservatives, they do not have the votes to get something through the U.S. Congress, no matter what they tell you on a campaign trail. And that's where it comes into problems. They're asking for things that they cannot be delivered to them, if they're even asking.
Yeah. So how does it end? I mean, we obviously want to cover, what legislation is still moving forward. We want to talk to you about some of the issues, but I think, how do we get out of this logjam?
Well, and then that's kind of, I tell my kids, two things I hate: laziness and wasting my time. And that's really what
Those
a lot
are
of
two things you hate.
among the two things. She said, try and make it fun. But that's really what we're dealing here. We're wasting our time. We've known for a while it wasn't going to be Jordan, but how much time did we just lose? About a week. We know that at some point you're going to have to cut a deal with Democrats on government spending. That's inevitable. So whomever the speaker is, you're already setting that up. You can't come in and say, I'm not going to pass X, Y, and Z. That's just going to lead to a government shutdown and Republicans losing the House. So the way you get out of it is, I don't know that they end up getting this quote, they're not going to do a unity government. That's not a thing in the U.S. We don't do that. I don't even know that you'll get Democrats that would be going along at this point with the McHenry, because they're going to demand some things back, right, that Republicans aren't going to want to give them. And that's just going to be an increasing challenge. In the end, Republicans are going to have to agree among themselves as a majority allegedly governing party is supposed to do. And that might take some more time, but they're going to have to find a candidate that can get that 217. I don't know that, you and I were talking earlier. Can they find that person, though?
Can they find that person?
I know. We're here at Friday at almost 1 o'clock, and they're probably going to go at it again this afternoon, I would assume.
Yeah.
At this point, they should just not let anybody leave town until they figure it out, because we can't move on some things.
Yeah. We're about to switch to legislation, like what's out there, right? What are the implications? Do people have questions, though, about the speaker situation? Does everybody sort of understand that? Because it's sort of scene setting for the rest of the presentation. So I think we can pause here and take a question or two and then move on.
Got a couple.
Yeah, go ahead. And just to ask your question, I'll repeat it. So we. Yeah. The question is, could Democrats, putting up Hakeem Jeffries, for example, or somebody else, try to recruit some maybe middle-of-the-road Republicans over to become the speaker?
So what you'll do is you'll see there's two votes. There's a quorum call, and that's to establish how many people will be present to vote, and you'll divide that number by half. That's why today Jordan could stand to lose 6, because there were 2 missing on both sides, whereas the day prior, he could only stand to lose 5. So regardless, you're still going to need to get to a majority, and absent Republicans not showing up, then you will still always have at least 1, 2, 3, and up to right now 4 more Republicans serving. So that is the reason. It would have
Yeah.
to take a majority.
Right, and I think the other piece to your question is, and I think people, reasonable people, ask this all the time. Well, aren't there just enough people at the edge on either party that would be willing to vote with the other party in order to just get a speaker in? And I think popular wisdom in Washington is that there are not enough.
I'll give you your fun fact. So I'm supposed to be fun. You've only once had.
You're nailing fun so far.
So this one is so fun. Only once in history has the minority party had the speaker of a legislature, and it was in California, and it was only for about 12 days. So this is not something that's happened before. And just think of the Republicans that would take. Right, fine, get those 4 or 5. Who are they? They have to be either retiring or already know they're going to lose no matter what their district. Like, look at Mike Lawler, who's from New York. He's in a Biden plus 10 district. That means Biden won his district by 10 points, and he's a Republican. He doesn't have a whole lot of Jim Jordan room to maneuver here, and he's not inviting Speaker Jordan to his district anytime soon if he wants to win a Biden plus 10.
But even in a district like that, you're still uninclined to go over and vote with the minority party, because the threat, obviously, from your party would be that they would primary you and run somebody else and try to knock you out of the race. So you know, a demonstration of not being loyal in this instance is just really unlikely that somebody is in that kind of district. And there might be maybe 2 of them, but there just aren't enough, to your question.
Right.
Yeah.
So how long is how bad is the short-term or long-term damage to Republicans by doing it? Part of it is we saw the slide of 17% dysfunction, and you already have such a low opinion of the U.S. Congress. How much lower can it go? Well, you're just finding out now. It can go further, and depends on what comes out of it, especially if they do have to make promises to those on the far right, that'll just really help put that nail in the coffin of Republicans controlling the House after 2024, right? Because that's the real thing, is how much do you give those folks on the right? These districts are going to be Republican no matter what. AOC can lose tomorrow, but that will be a left Democrat district no matter what. Those aren't the votes or the seats that make a majority, and that's really what the Republicans are trying to balance. How much do we give to the right versus just knowing that we do that? You're almost guaranteed to lose some of those Biden 18, and you can only stand to really lose 4 or 5. Mm-hmm. So yes, it is definitely doing some additional damage in those targeted seats.
Right.
Frank?
Right. So his question, in case somebody couldn't hear it, is what got us in this whole situation is McCarthy agreeing to, remember when he went 15 rounds trying to get the speakership, he had to make a number of concessions to people on the far right of his caucus. And he said, okay, I will allow anybody, any one member, to try to vacate the speakership, to put up a motion to vacate the speakership if you don't agree with what I've done. They called that bluff, and here we are. So the question is, does that concession still stand for a new speaker? And the problem, of course, is that they're still negotiating with the same people. So it's difficult to believe that any new speaker would be able to get in without making that concession to them, now having had McCarthy make it. What do you think?
I'd agree. Why would you want to do this all over again? Any speaker that agrees to the same terms that McCarthy did is effectively a lame duck all over again, because any single member could, again, bring a subject to the call and then to call it vacant all over again. So no, if they do find a speaker, it would likely have a rule change within the Republican conference, and that is likely it. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can't go to court. These are internal one-party rules, and then they are internal U.S. House rules. So unless you're a member of the House, and then really the courts are going to say we don't have standing, that is a separate legislative body. And then lastly on this one is bills can be introduced, but they cannot be referred to the committee, because technically it's the job of the speaker to refer bills to the committees of jurisdiction, and McHenry, as temporary, he's an appointed speaker pro tem. If he's an elected speaker pro tem, that's different. He will have virtually all of the powers of the traditional Speaker of the House. But at this point, he's an appointed Speaker pro tem, and that was something that was done after 9/11, and it was McCarthy that put McHenry from North Carolina at the top of the list, and that's how you got here today. So hopefully they just won't rinse and repeat.
Right. I feel like hopefully was doing a lot of work in that sentence.
Yes.
Hopefully they won't just. Okay, so I think that gives you a useful lay of the land of where we are. The path out of it isn't super clear, but knowing obviously that they're working toward a path, and I think you have some parameters of what that path looks like. I think what you're looking at now is what's at stake. So why does it even matter that we don't have a speaker? What is the impact? And so there's a lot, actually, that needs to be done, that Congress needs to get back to work on doing. These are some pieces of legislation, but I think one of the biggest issues, of course, is that we still stare down a fiscal cliff. So recall that McCarthy's last act before being tossed from the speakership was a deal with the Democrats to kick the can down the road a little bit on funding the government. But that can kicking actually runs out pretty soon on the 16th or 17th? 17th of December.
Of November.
Of November, rather. Really, really soon. So these items are what's on the table. Do you want to take a couple of these and sort of tell folks what to watch for?
Well, maybe we even just start with that November 17th deadline. Most of Washington believes, guess what, we're heading for another shutdown, that we barely avoided that Saturday when this all went through to get that temporary extension. So the 47-day extension that they signed was literally just that. They passed 0 of the government spending bills. The House has passed 4 that will never see the light of day in the U.S. Senate. This is because they're all Republican-only bills. The Senate, however, has been passing all of theirs out of committee. Every single one has been bipartisan, and if not unanimous, overwhelmingly bipartisan. They passed the defense authorization bill out of the Senate with 86 Senate votes. That does not happen very often. In the House, they had 4 Democrats and then I think lost 8 Republicans, or it might have been the inverse. But there's not a whole lot of bipartisanship going on in the Senate or the House. But whereas in the Senate, they really are striving to get the legislation done, especially on appropriations. The chair and the vice chair, they both have committed to get the legislation done in a bipartisan manner, and they've kept to it. And that's just not something we've really seen around that town for quite some time. But again, well, the issue there is you still have to have a functioning House. Right. You literally have 1/2 of 1/3 of government that is just not functioning right now. And some would argue they haven't been functioning for a little bit. And how are you going to get the Republican Party to be functioning? It is in the best interest of Democrats on Capitol Hill to have a strong Republican Party that at least can govern when they're in charge. And right now you just don't have that. And that's now going to push a lot of this legislation further on, because as you're right, November 17th will be here pretty quick. We're looking at government spending bills to avoid a government shutdown. They're likely going to extend again more into December, which means we may not see government spending bills finalized until right before Christmas, around December 22nd, and all these other things that are here might hitch a ride. Many of them, whether it's Farm Bill, FAA, all of those. Again, Defense Authorization Act is very important for you all in this room, for many of you. That's the policy bill for the Pentagon. That's passed every single year since 1961. Every single year. Congress doesn't do a whole lot, folks, but that is one of the things that they do annually. And so we do think they'll finally get there, but even as you just take a look at this list, it's quite daunting, and it really just comes back to your basic function at this point is keep the government running and pass the government spending bills. And I think that's what really we're hoping for them to do at the base minimum for the rest of this calendar year.
Yeah. So I want to drill down a little bit on tax issues, because I think part of the message that we're saying is, yes, there is this ongoing crisis in trying to identify a speaker and get the House back to functioning order. But that actually doesn't mean that there's no work happening at all. Staffers are continuing work so that as soon as there is a speaker and they can refer bills to committee, the bills will be in order and ready to go. So staffers continue to hold meetings and continue to do work. And the not so secret that most of you know is that the government is really being run in large part by the staff. So if there is any note of optimism, there are people working. It's just maybe not the ones you see on TV. So what's happening on the tax side? Well, we have talked a lot about the importance of the R&D tax issue for members. I want to talk to you just as a quick reminder here about how many people that this impacts. So you all know that One Voice does an annual survey of members. That's NTMA members and PMA members. And our findings in 2023 found that about 30% of members expected to reduce their R&D activities in 2023 if there was not a restoration of the R&D expensing credit to a full and immediate expensing, which of course has not yet happened, and that over half of members expected a reduction in their CapEx investment without a return to 100% expensing under bonus depreciation. So what we know is that it impacts a lot of members, and we also know that that has a real implication on innovation and leadership in U.S. manufacturing. So as staff is addressing this issue, that's House GOP tax writers, Senate Democratic tax writers trying to work together. Do we expect any kind of resolution on this issue? I know in the past we've talked about how it's really closely linked to the child care tax credit, which is an issue. So what do we expect on that?
Sure, and that's why we gave you some of this background on what's happening with the government spending bills.
That's right.
And the timeline on it, because very few bills in Congress actually become laws on their own. They hitch a ride on something else. Usually it's a must-pass vehicle. So what we do as your lobbyists is spend a lot of time building up an issue, a policy issue, a concept that we then want to attach later on. Because if you're just focusing on that one legislation, that S bill number, the HR number, those don't become law. It's not just a bill on Capitol Hill anymore. It's not as fun as it used to be. It's just, they literally wait till the last minute, pile some things on, and that's what we build up throughout the year. But to step back for a moment, research and development, there's a couple of things. We're not talking about the R&D tax credit. That is section 41. The tax credit, R&D, still exists. You can still claim that. It'll help offset about 10% of your R&D expensing issue right now. In 2017, when Republicans passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they gave you five full years of full and immediate expensing of your R&D activities. After those 5 years, starting in January 1 of 2022, you had to then capitalize your R&D activities as an asset to pay taxes on and amortize them over 5 years, which really means it's a 10-year span that you're dealing with this starting year 1 and then going on and so forth. What that did now, according to our survey results that Caitlin talked about, it created a liability of taxes for 2022 for many of our members that averaged around $250,000. We've talked to some in this room that it's getting to $400,000, $500,000 is the amount of tax you had to pay because of your R&D exposure for 2022, taking away from your investments in people, in process, in machinery for this calendar year as well. Keep in mind, even if you do not claim the credit, you conduct any R&D activities, you are still liable to pay this tax. So even if you say, no, we're not doing any R&D, I'm not claiming any of it, the IRS does not matter to them. If you're going to take a, quote, gap year, they're going to be looking for that as well. And that $250,000, that $300,000, $400,000 really has a lot better use with your hands than it does in Washington. That I can guarantee you, because it's going straight into the general treasury. That is why we've been lobbying on this, to get it fixed. It's going to take a bipartisan solution. See how many times I say that today. It will take a bipartisan agreement because Democrats want something in exchange. In an election cycle, they are not going to give corporate tax credits and deductions and incentives away. It is not going to happen. They have already told us they want the child tax credit expansion, where prior you were getting around $6,000, up from $3,500 per child up until the age of 17. They still want that expansion reinstated after it expired. And this is normal horse trading in Washington. Nothing against R&D. Very bipartisan support. Bonus depreciation, lots of support there as well from some Democrats. But this is leverage. And if you don't use your leverage, it's a waste of power in Washington. So until Republicans and Democrats come together on a child tax credit agreement, you will not get an agreement on R&D. So if you do not hear from me between now and then, which is hard because you hear from us on our podcast and our webinars and our newsletters, but your tell is going to be on CNBC or on Bloomberg, wherever you get financial news. Whenever they start talking about a deal on the child tax credit, now you know a fix for R&D is starting to move. And the R&D fix in the language that we lobbied to get in the House bill is retroactive to January 1 of 2022 to try to make you whole. So that's where we stand right now. But the timeline, I would look at it, I don't think you'll get a final determination until around December 22nd, 23rd, whatever those Thursday, Fridays are right before Christmas, because Congress can extend their own deadlines on government spending. They cannot punt on Christmas or New Year's. They will face a deadline at some point. And I'm not saying it will get done, I'm saying if it gets done, that is likely the timeline.
the child care tax credit is really popular, isn't it? So I feel like they have some incentive to move forward on that issue, particularly in an election year, which I think maybe rising tide, all the boats, this gets in because of that as well.
I'd agree with you. And so that's why when you always look at how is politics actually made, and a lot of that is by looking at the process, is really dictated by the politics of it. You've got Democrats in Wisconsin, and Tammy Baldwin, she's running for re-election as a Democrat, is for the Senate. She wants to win. Child tax credit, top priority for her. She's a progressive liberal. Same thing, Sherrod Brown on the left side needs this done. Bob Casey, Pennsylvania. Democrats can't hold the Senate without one, if not all three of those. And they know that they're not going to get a vote on taxes unless they appease those as well. And it is generally popular with the normal electorate. It's not likely going to be eligible for joint filers at 400,000, the way it was when Democrats wrote it, but you could see something at 70,000, 150 in that range, and that way you can go and help working class Americans, and you will get a lot of Republican votes. You'll get at least a dozen, if not 20. We have now more Senate Republican populists now than you do than I've ever seen in my 25 years in town. So you get a Josh Hawley to vote for that pretty easily, I think.
Yeah. Did you want to speak to this letter? I think one of the things, another important thing that we want you to hear is that NTMA has a really strong voice in Washington on advocacy issues. NTMA is out in front on tax issues. We'll talk about where you are on workforce and trade issues as well. This is an example of that, I think.
It is. So this originated in July of this year. There was a meeting in the Capitol. It was in the whip's office with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, that's tax writing, and 5 other of their members. It was me, there was somebody from the S Corp Association, NFIB had a lobbyist there, and then there were 4 groups that were just general tax advocacy. Small Business Majority was also in the room. So I was the only person in the room out of the 7 lobbyists for manufacturing, and our message to them is this is about small businesses, about family-owned businesses, about the backbone of American manufacturing. And the chairman said, absolutely, if we go around saying this is for Microsoft, for Intel, for Boeing, you're not going to get a fix on R&D. Yeah. And so what they tasked us with, especially we got outreach in late August from the main staffer at the committee, she said, we need help from small business groups being the face. Staff, NAM, love them, but they held on September 15th, they held a staff briefings where they bring in staffers to teach them about an issue for R&D. Well, who was there? It was Microsoft, Intel, and then there was a mold manufacturer that did work for our mold association. But those 2 multinational corporations are not the face that we need right now if we're going to get this over the edge. It has to be you all. It has to be small family-owned businesses. What does that $250,000 mean to you? Weighing in through those action alerts to your elected officials is critical, and that's why we went on the record. The staff asked us to do this, and they know it's real. If we are going to get Democrats to come to the table, it's not going to be because of Boeing and Intel and the multinationals. It's because of you all, and that's been our role and why they came to us to specifically help give them some top cover with their members at that meeting and then beyond.
Yep. I think that's really helpful. These letters are also the kind of things that get picked up by media, so they're really helpful for that. And that's why you get those emails that say things like, you know, click and tell us that you care about this, or go to the website and click on this issue alert. And so that's something that we are always happy to talk more about, how to get involved. Those things are really, really helpful when we're pushing policy issues like this that can feel very in the weeds, but they are so, so important to all of the members in this room, which we know. Let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about workforce issues. Yesterday, as I was saying, when Roger, you were walking through the results of the member survey, workforce consistently at the top of the list, how to fill open jobs, how to retain and recruit people. So a little readout of Manufacturing Day for anybody who decided to participate, and I hope that many of you in the room did. That's the first Friday in October, of course, Manufacturing Month. There were 3,000 events on Manufacturing Day this year in all of the 50 states and in Puerto Rico. Over 300,000 students, parents, and community members attended those events. So I think that's great. And I know that many of the folks in this room did participate because you reached out and told us that you did. So that's great. I also want to note, though, that the skilled workforce gap is not a new thing. Like, this is an issue we've been working on for a decade. Everybody knows that this is a problem and is pressing and it's important to all of you. What is new is that there are initiatives, and we're going to talk about both, you know, coming from the executive branch, so White House and executive agencies, and also from Congress to try to address those issues. One of the most important things, though, is that as manufacturers, and particularly as NTMA members, you haven't waited for the government to do something to fix the problem. I think it's evidenced in the fact that you've got training programs that are effective, you've got these cohorts that are full. On the panel discussion yesterday, there was a whole discussion about how you've gone out and recruited and retained and made your shops welcoming to diverse employees. All of those are really important initiatives too. So I think it's important. We're going to talk to you a little bit about what government's doing, but know that we know that that you guys are really leaders in this space on your own as well. So let's quickly talk though about what's happening from the White House. Look at that! You even put an exclamation point on this slide. Yeah, fun.
See, thank you. I am fun. This is as fun as I get, folks.
One
That's my
endorsement
kids.
for fun from Bonnie. Okay, so talk about the White House initiative.
So you mentioned Manufacturing Month. And I'm on listservs all from all parts of the agency, Department of Energy, Department of Labor, Commerce, NIST, all of these folks, even EPA. They're talking about Manufacturing Month. This is everywhere in their, I'll call it propaganda, in all their messaging right now in this month. It's all over the place. Next month is going to be, they're going to have an apprenticeship week. The White House is really putting a big emphasis on this. The Trump administration did as well when it comes to manufacturing, because guess what? They understand where the elections are going to be won. People often say, we can talk about DeSantis and others and Hillary, you've got to be for something in policy. In 2016, Trump had a message. It was industrial policy. He had manufacturing message just oozing out of him. And a lot of that is really here, and Biden understands that. A lot of his folks really do as well. They just last week launched a advanced manufacturing sprint where they're looking to partner with organizations and companies that will help commit to work on registered apprenticeship program, career and technical education and learning programs, and helping create industry-recognized credentials that are then transferred nationally across industry should employees decide to move. It's also, of course, a big emphasis on unions within this initiative, and then community colleges would be the third branch that they're looking at within the manufacturing sprint. Roger was at the White House late, about 11 months ago or so. We've got a great connection. He was in touch with somebody with the National Economic Council also earlier this year, and I've been in touch with Sue, the staffer, as well as some follow-up with their office. We have a call on next Tuesday on the 23rd with the Department of Education to talk about some of their initiatives as well with regards to career promotion. But you're definitely seeing it. Now, where does it ultimately lead to? What we need is recruitment. We need more folks in there, but we pretty much have the largest megaphone, whatever you'd like to call it, in the country, at least in the White House. And they are trying to push this message out, and I think that we've helped get them there. Roger going to the White House, getting the message out that these are family-sustaining careers that are out there, and they're at 35 employee shops. And they're a whole lot better going to than some of these multinationals that may not have the community's best interest in mind. And that's why we continued our connections with the White House. We felt that they've kept that dialogue open, and since they opened that door, we're going full steam ahead until somebody says stop.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly in an election year, you're going to see a lot more politicians, candidates, taking shop tours, walking around in hard hats. I mean, the image of all of that is what people want because they know that manufacturing polls particularly well. And of course, it's a little bit of a cynical interpretation. It's also reasonable to believe that they believe that the U.S. should be an economic engine in the manufacturing space. And I think you'll see a lot of that in the dialogue and in the media as well, which is obviously great for the industry. No matter who's out there touring, that kind of press is really helpful.
And having a seat at that table, being that voice for manufacturing, and being able to send that message just directly. We can send the NTMA benchmark that Roger sent me about 2-3 weeks ago to them so they could start seeing, because too often they're getting reports from the Federal Reserve. They're getting it from the SEC public filings. What are they getting from privately held companies that really a lot of these policies are really supposed to be directed to support? And that's what we've been trying to do with that open door that we've had at the White House, that seat at the table that's been created for NTMA. And also at the Labor Department, we've seen some as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Labor Department's putting out a lot of interesting information. They have a focus on the materials that they're putting together. Here's a screenshot from one of their blogs where they're talking about open jobs, and they have resources and tools to help people fill those positions. That's useful. It's useful anytime somebody has a big megaphone and they want to focus on our issues in our industry. So I think that's a positive. You know, it's also, this is the thing that we used to do years and years ago when I started working for NTMA. We used to track like how often the White House or executive branches mentioned manufacturing. And we'd be pumped if it like approached 10. Like we'd be like, 2 mentions in the State of the Union, like this is great. And now, of course, like that tracking would be completely unmanageable. We would be inundated with results from every branch of government talking about the importance of manufacturing. That is a testament to the work that's being done by your lobbyists, by the leaders of your organization. So it is true that, you know, there's more attention, there's more focus, and I think that that is meaningful for driving.
So 10 years ago, could you imagine the Department of Labor, whatever is 15 years ago, 20 years ago, Department of Labor just creating a graphic image like this, talking about tool and die and machinists and all the different industries? No, they likely would not be putting this out. They're not putting this out as data. They're putting this out to promote careers.
Yeah, correct.
That is completely different than what government has been doing. And I've been working for manufacturers since now 21 years. And being your voice in Washington for industry, I've never seen government do something like this with manufacturers, especially at this level of detail. And I think that's an important sea change. This is now the positive part. We're going to take it downhill soon, folks. So that's at least the positive.
But enjoy it.
Enjoy while it lasts.
Yeah. When you said 21 years, I was going to make a joke about you being old, and then I was like, no, we're doing so well right now.
You just did, though. This is called back.
I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. Okay, so we've talked about the White House. We've talked about executive agency. I do want to talk a little bit about the role of Congress, our friends in Congress, on addressing workforce issues. We've been talking in the last couple of meetings about some important legislative efforts to address workforce issues. We've sorted them here into unlikely, possible, unlikely. We should have maybe put them in the other order, so the good things would be on top. But what's likely to happen, even in gridlock, I think there is still some hope for training funds at least.
In 2014, we worked on a very bipartisan bill called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, known as WIOA. That was the first time in decades, I think since the late 1960s, that the workforce training, career technical education programs across the country at the federal level had ever really been updated. Most training programs, you know, are done through the states, but the funds tend to come from the federal government down into the states and then into the local communities. And so we've been trying to update this legislation, which lasted for 5 years, and WIOA is not going to get done. We just don't have the time left. We already discussed what's happening in the House. But even as late as July 26th, we were talking to Senate staff when they were still holding out some hope, but they're just time's running out. They don't have the path forward on getting things that are updated. Again, the world's changed a lot. Requirements from industry has changed a lot. The needs of industry have certainly changed a lot since pre-pandemic. And so we don't see that one happening. National Apprenticeship Act, we thought we were going to get a little bit close. We had a window, we thought, for this December. That has not been updated since 1937. So, I won't make a Biden joke, but FDR was president. You've got all kinds of, it's been a while.
It was right there, though.
Yeah,
the joke was right there.
It was there, I left
Yeah.
1937, that is literally the last time Congress overhauled apprenticeship rules. That's legislation. That's a long time. The world is very vastly different. And again, we thought we would get close on that one. Time has started to run out. College Transparency Act, that's one we've pushed for some years, where that would help borrowers have a better understanding of what they're getting themselves into, graduation rates, then also job retention rates, and recidivism, all of those issues. And that won't go through. The chairwoman in the House committee, she's opposing it because the data requirements are something that she worked on in 07, 08, she thought would roll back. So that's also gone. So again, we'll get a little bit better. 529s, we do have a chance on this one.
Just on those though, because they are written and they did generate some support, if it's a matter of the clock running out, those are things that could potentially be reintroduced in a new Congress and find life again.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've got the Jobs Act where you could shorten for short-term Pell Grants and getting them down to 150 hours, for example, in 8-week courses. That we could still get in that final government spending bill. That's been fleshed now for 3 Congresses, so we certainly could. But you're right, in the next Congress, when we see what the makeup is after the elections, that'll certainly dictate which way we're going to go on some of the workforce and the training and registered apprentices. That's an excellent point. And elections will drive a lot of these things that do not get completed by the end of this year and early into next. And that's where we look at what is doable for the remainder of the year on workforce-led bipartisan legislation that we're looking at and supported, deals with expanding 529s. And that would cover industry-recognized credentials, professional certifications, and other programs that are out there to help some of these individuals that change their mind and say, well, maybe no, I'm not going to go to that four-year college after all, and I want to be able to use those funds tax-free without pulling them out and paying a penalty. And there's bipartisan support. If we do get a tax chapter, that's something that we're hoping to get in there. But to your point, federal funding, we did well over on the Senate side. There were a lot of cuts, about 30% cuts to some adult programs and even some youth training programs over on the House side that we're hoping to reinstate on those levels. But we have to see who's a speaker, because the Speaker Jordan would likely not go along with reinstating some of those cuts, whereas a Speaker Scalise or a McHenry or other might be more willing to go back to the levels that were agreed upon in the bipartisan budget or debt agreement that was back in June.
All roads lead back to the speaker debate. We're gonna switch to regulations here. Sometimes we spend a ton of time on regulations because that has such an impact on business. We won't do as much time on that today only because there is another discussion tomorrow about regulatory issues. I will show you this handy tracker which shows that in 2023 so far, we're looking at more than 2,000 final rules. 2,000 feels like a lot to cover, even for you. So we probably
I'm going to, by the way. It's 2,000.
You just start alphabetically. No, okay. So, but we do on the podcast, and if you are not already subscribed, you should be subscribed. The Talking with One Voice podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. We talk a lot about regulatory issues, talk about OSHA and EPA and NLRB and other agencies and acronyms. But instead of going through all of those, I just want to show this one slide where we've got regulations to watch in 2023. We've distilled that list of 2,000 down to a few. I'm going to ask you to narrow it maybe even more, cover just a couple here that these folks should really be watching, and then I guess give a little preview of tomorrow's session where I know you'll be with an OSHA lawyer expert for NTMA.
Sure. Absolutely. So let me just at least start with overtime. This is a flashback to the Obama era, when former President Obama tried to increase the overtime exemption threshold for executive, administrative, professional, and clerical full-time salaried employees. It was set at $23,000 at the time. He tried to more than double it, up to over $47,000. A court stepped in November of 2016 after the election and said, no, you could not do that. Trump came in, increased the overtime exemption threshold from that $23,000 to $35,568, where it currently sits today. So that means anybody that's salaried, EAP, meets the duties test and all those, would be subject and eligible is currently for time and a half. What Biden is trying to do is increase from that 35,568 and take it up to 55,068. That would be the baseline. And what they're thinking about doing is it would take effect 60 days after they publish it in the Federal Register. So there probably could be sometime we're thinking it could be early in the spring, maybe April to May timeframe, if not even sooner, that they could take this trigger that could go into effect. From our previous surveys, when we look at some of your wage and hourly, it probably affects about 10 FTEs in your shop. If you think about somebody in the office side that you've got there that probably would be eligible for time and a half, in addition to taking it up, and again, they're proposing getting it to that 55,068, but the proposed rule also says they could come back with as high as 60,000. And that 60,008 threshold, they would also then increase it every 3 years. They're going to index that to the 35th percentile of the lowest census earning region, which is the South, meaning that they're going to take the median income of that southern region, take the 35%, and continuously increase it every 3 years. So for a company such as yourselves, that maybe you have 5 or 6 FTEs that could fall into that under 55 or under 60,000 threshold for time and a half, you need to think about, if I'm doing a new hire, do I hire them at 61? Do I hire them at a different rate? Do I hire them at hourly? Instead, do I convert any of my salary to hourlies? And would I do that around the holidays? These are things to factor in. In addition, they have highly compensated employees, which is currently set at 107,000. The Biden administration wants to allow time and a half for those earning under 143,000. So think of your controller, think of some of those individuals that are there. Maybe you have a communications person that's not a supervisor. Those now making up to 143,000 would earn time and a half. and that could have quite an impact on a family-owned business and could take effect here within the next 4 to 6 months or so. That's one of the big ones that we're watching closely. Final comments are due on November 7th, and NTMA's coalition partners are looking in that one as well. So that's one of the big ones that are out there that we're really focused on. I'll throw it back to you here in a second. One other is a worker walk-around that's not on this list, but where they are looking at, over on OSHA, allowing third-party representatives, such as a union representative, even if you're not an organized shop, to accompany that OSHA inspector on a plant tour. And by that, they're saying even if OSHA doesn't, OSHA would have to allow it. That inspector saying, yes, there's a reasonable need for that individual, but it's a backdoor way for unions to be able to go in to a non-organized shop. And again, usually from what we're interpreting, one individual could make that request. One other one that I'm watching closely, I know your firm does a lot though, is on climate change disclosure. When you look at California, Gavin Newsom just signed that into law, companies with $1 billion or more in revenues. If you have $1 billion or more in revenue, you are touching the state of California somehow, which means you are going to have to look at your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions requirements. And let Caitlin put it back into English, your scope 1 emissions and what they're asking you to report in some instances are the emissions that your facility, are putting out directly. Your scope 2 are going to be more on the energy source that is coming in, that is calculated as well. And your scope 3, if you look at the state of California, they're asking you to calculate the emissions from your commute of your employees to your shops. So ask if they're driving EVs. You're hearing about this. I assume it's everywhere.
Oh yeah, our firm does a great deal of work in climate change issues and in energy and environmental regulations. We've got teams of lawyers who work on compliance issues around this stuff. One of the benefits to NTMA is that we do make that kind of analysis available to you. So when they crank out reports about compliance issues, and we do make their lawyers, our lawyers from Bracewell, available on webinars and things as these issues become relevant. So that is certainly something that we are watching closely. I want to mention, you said as an aside, that this is when comments are due. For people, especially because I know there's a lot of first-time attendees here, people who are especially a part of the emerging leaders cohort, one of the things that you should know is that when these regulatory issues are happening, there is a time period before the rule becomes final. When they publish the rule, and then there is a time period where people who will be affected by the rule can submit comments. And that's what Omar is referring to. NTMA, through Omar and John, alongside other people who are in your space. So sometimes NTMA on your own, sometimes working in a coalition of other people, will file comments on these kind of regulations that tell the government agency who's considering them how the regulation will impact your businesses. And those comments are considered by the agency as they make a decision on how to process a final rule. So that's a place that I think is lesser known. When we think about the role of lobbyists, you think about sort of walking through the halls of Capitol Hill and knocking on the door of policymakers, but all that other work is also a part of what you get through your One Voice efforts. And so I just wanted to underline that when you said file comments. Like, do people know what that means? So that's part of what we do. Okay, we'll talk, we have a little slide in here on the heat rule, but I know you're going to talk about that tomorrow.
We are. So tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning in the
Can't miss session.
Can't miss session tomorrow. E.g., if this one wasn't fascinating enough for you on regulations, we would definitely get into it tomorrow. But you will have an expert. We've got Stephen here from McMahon-Berger, and he and I will go through what you can expect from OSHA and what we're seeing right now and get to a lot more details on some of those new requirements, some existing, and what to expect in the coming year from OSHA as well. Just one example here, and this is the OSHA indoor heat rule that we've been working on. NTMA filed comments on this on October 2nd. OSHA, in its infinite wisdom, is looking to regulate indoor workspaces when the heat index exceeds 80 degrees Fahrenheit by mandating that employees are forced to take a 15-minute break every 2 hours when the heat index exceeds even 87 degrees. They want to require certain types of onboarding. For example, if you have a new employee, they're going to look at how your weather acclimatization, they say they want you to maybe work 50% day 1, 60% day 2, and still keep getting paid on day 3, and so on and so forth till you're ramped up. They've looked at having different, reducing your work shifts, changing schedules, access to cold water, specified the degree, temperature of the water as well. I've had, and we were in one of the sessions that I was on, we had one person says, you know what I do with my employees? I ask them where they went on vacation. If they went on Alaska, we ease them back into the work shift so they can get used to it. But if they went to the panhandle of the beach, he's getting right back on that machine. That's how scientific we're getting, folks. So for tomorrow, we'll get a little bit more detailed on that. Please come to that session at 8:30. We'll be talking about not just the heat rule, what it could mean for your shop if OSHA were to move forward, but a number of other spaces, and you'll hear from an expert there.
Great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about trade issues, just to let you know where we are in this presentation. We've covered what's going on in Congress. We talked about regulatory issues. Now we're going to talk about trade, and then we'll touch politics just one more time on the way out.
We'll keep this one quick, we promise.
That's where we are in this presentation. Okay, so trade issues. We've been talking about trade issues for quite some time. This is actually a place of rare bipartisan alignment between administrations. So for folks who maybe aren't tracking this closely, let's go back a step. We know that President Trump, when he was in office, set in place tariffs on Chinese metal imports. Those tariffs have been kept largely in place by President Biden. And this little chart here may give you a sense of why that's true. For folks who have difficult time seeing the screen, you're seeing here how voters perceive toughness on China, essentially. So this says, in an election, would you be more or less likely to support a candidate who does the following? And what we've highlighted is supports additional tariffs on Chinese imports. You have the majority of respondents there saying, I would be more likely to support a candidate who supports more tariffs on Chinese imports. So you see there this overlap between the Biden administration and the Trump administration on pushing for those efforts. That is an issue for some members in this room because there are people whose businesses are negatively impacted by these tariffs. And NTMA has been a leader in this space through work with CAMU, which is an acronym, that metal manufacturers and users is what that MU of CAMU stands for. And NTMA is a founding member of that organization. We have, again, ding, ding, filed comments about these tariffs. Are we expecting any real changes in this space? It doesn't look like there's much incentive for change, but for the fact that small businesses may say that they're impacted. What do we expect from the Biden administration?
Right, let's work our way backwards from the politics and the reality of 2024. If Joe Biden wants to win Pennsylvania, he can't do anything to get on the wrong side of the steel unions. If Biden wants to win Wisconsin, and doesn't have a chance in Ohio, but looking at some of the other states as well that are out there, he is going to have to do something for trade issues. He cannot look weak on China, for example. There's two different sets of tariffs right now. The tariffs on China will remain. He might lift some at the end of the year on some consumer-related products, but for the most part, the tariffs on Chinese tool and die and machine products that we lobby to maintain will likely remain in place. We'll see what they decide towards the end of the year. And that's, again, partially an industrial policy decision. They see what's happening to the industrial base here, but they also look at the political reality in many of the states that Biden needs to win. So we do anticipate, at least reflected on the China side, those 301 tariffs, 6,800 products have 25% tariff, 3,200 products have 7.5%. Those will stay in place. But on the next slide, when you start taking a look at some of the metals, to your point, Caitlin, that starts to get a little bit more iffy because the Biden administration here is trying to have it both ways. They want to appease both the unions and the environmental groups. If the Biden administration can find a way to impose tariffs because of carbon, that'll help them with the enviros. If they can impose tariffs in general, that'll help them with the steel unions and those kind of folks, and the anti-China crowd. And that's where they're trying to find a way to be able to put in something with regards to an agreement on steel and aluminum, but it doesn't look like, as of today, this morning, the EU and the US were able to come to an agreement that would take effect anytime soon. So they're still struggling to come back and forth. Right now, you still do have tariffs on steel and aluminum. I think you will ultimately have some kind of a carbon tariff. That's where the US is trying to take this, and maybe also a tariff on excess steel from non-market economies such as China. And that's really where the focus is, at least this week with the meeting that's happening right now.
And if they did do a carbon-based tariff system, that would bring them closer into alignment with the EU's program, right?
They absolutely would. So if you've been following this, on October 1st, the European Union started implementing what they call their CBAM. It's the carbon-based It's the carbon-based tariff system. And under the CBAM, what they're achieving mechanism, and what they get under the CBAM is they're trying to put tariffs on imports of products coming into the EU that don't already have a carbon footprint on there. And under this, you'll have to buy CBAM certificates starting in 2026. Starting in January 31st of this coming year, you'll have to file reports if you import certain products into the European Union. Iron and steel, products of iron and steel, if you're Chapter 72 or 73, you are likely subject to this. They've got hydrogen, fertilizer, a few other categories as well before they look to expand this. Where they're going with it is they're trying to, again, impose tariffs on high carbon imports coming into the EU, and the U.S. is marching towards that. By January 2025, the U.S. hopes to have some kind of a carbon footprint plan that would then match the Europeans. So then anything that crosses the borders, starting with steel and metal products and expanding beyond, would be subject to a tariff. And that's something to start thinking about from your supply lines, especially as the Europeans are already doing it. This is not a proposal. It started October 1st, and the U.S. is starting to move forward as well.
Yeah. And that would make sort of an in club and an out club for the,
exactly.
yeah. One thing that I think we've talked about, one thing that I think is consuming a great deal of people's mental energy, which is, how do you restore functioning of government? I think the other thing that we'd be remiss not to address is the other major issue that's in the news, which is there is growing geopolitical instability around the world. I mean, we know that to be true. Obviously, the conflict in Russia and Ukraine shows no signs of slowing down as it drags on towards its second year. Now we see, obviously, this horrific situation happening between Israel and Palestine, their conflict with Hamas. So what should manufacturers be thinking about, we saw, obviously, with Russia, a huge ripple across supply chains. When the world is less stable, it does seem to have significant impacts for manufacturers. What should people be thinking about how to sort of take in that information and how they should be thinking about it in the context of business?
Sure. And many folks still have a lot of their politics grounded in 1970s, 1973, oil embargo, and many of those issues. We are the world's largest exporter at this point. The issue, though, that you have to look at is if you tried to strangle, let's say, Iran even more and ban even more of their oil exports, then what does that do? It drives the price up. It does two things. One, it creates more problem with the Chinese, who are buying most of the Iranian oil, and it plays right into the Saudi Arabians' hands, who want to see oil at about $92 to $100 per barrel. And when that increases, the Saudis get even more profit, and they'd be able to funnel for more of their activities as well. From a supply chain disruption standpoint, if you start seeing things happening in the Suez Canal and the Sinai Peninsula and some disruptions and bottlenecks there on shipments of products, that you could potentially see some disruptions. But so far, at least from the market standpoint, mostly it's been relatively stable. I know you had an economist earlier to hear from, but you still probably have another week or two until you could potentially see some of the ripple effects. Gold was just starting now to tick up, and obviously seeing what's going on with the 10-year and the Treasury market and the bonds as well.
Yeah. That's helpful. And I think there's probably still just a lot of uncertainty in terms of how that impacts. Okay. Dun, dun, dun. We've got 10 minutes left. We'll talk a little bit of politics at the end, and then we'll try to hold a minute or two for questions. But of course, it would not be a DC team presentation without a look down the road to the next election. We are talking 2024. The House is a real disaster at the moment, but that doesn't mean that the election won't be held. So one of the reasons probably, honestly, that things are so chaotic is that, as we alluded to in response to the question, there is so much fear of being primaried, right? Because in the House, people are up every 2 years. It means a lot of seats are up for re-election in 2024. What should people be watching in the House races here? What should they get from this crazy slide?
I know, there's a lot of names on it. Where you start with, the way if you want to read it, in the middle is toss-ups, leans, likelies. So if you start in the middle, those will be the races that would be generally considered a toss-up in the 435 House of Representatives And then just out there, the lighter blue, lighter red, those are going to be your leans, and then you get into your likelies out on the outer outskirts. If it does start getting really bad for either party, obviously the outer waves start rolling inside. If it seems to be a blowout, the inverse happens for one side will start to go this way. You really have 35 to 40 seats tops that are truly competitive out of 435. 35 seats is really where you're going to be looking at. In the end, I would argue about 11 seats are those where this is really going to be won. Their Democrats are going to pick up a seat in Alabama due to redistricting, and that's why you've got that one line of red all the way on that far left of your screen. That's the Alabama district there that will likely get created and flipped over for Democrats. You'll also, George Santos, no reference said, there, most likely that's going to get picked up by Democrats. Now, when we started this conversation on the speakership, we said net 5. Democrats need to net 5 in order to take over the House of Representatives, and we already said that there's 18 Republicans in Joe Biden districts, and there's only 5 Republicans or 5 Democrats rather in Donald Trump districts. So that shows you that you already have pretty much a lean favor towards Democrats when you walk into this, where you're going to see some of these key races that are around the country that are going to be there. You'll have a handful, 2 or 3 in California, maybe 1 or 2 in each of Florida and in Texas. North Carolina will still favor Republicans. Redistricting won't get done in time. New York, again, 5 Republicans there that are pretty much in Democrat districts, even up to plus 10 Biden. So they've got a tough road for Republicans to be able to hold on. And the Republican side, they can pick off maybe 1 or 2 Democrats here and there, but it's going to be difficult for Republicans to hold on to the House, particularly if the mess of this last week continues much longer.
But even if they hold on to the House, you are predicting changes in the Senate. So you could end up again with a divided government just in the reverse. Talk about what's going on in the Senate.
Absolutely. So in the Senate, really you need 60 to govern, but anything, if Biden wins, then Republicans need to net 2. If Trump wins, and we'll talk about that in a minute, if Trump wins, then Republicans just need to net 1 because the vice president will break a tie at 50-50. And that's how close it is. Your key races are going to be, West Virginia's gone. Most Democrats pretty much concede that will be flipped to Republicans. So then right there, you've got to see, do Democrats have an opportunity to pick up anything somewhere else? Or is it just try to hold it at 50-50 and have Biden relying on Biden winning and Kamala Harris breaking the tie, which is that strategy of looking at Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona as probably being some of the key places as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that I think is really interesting is when you look at what states actually matter, because you were talking about how relatively few people you have who are in districts that can even be flipped, right? And that plays out in the presidential too. And so you have here just 4 states to decide. You usually see some people say 3, some people say 4 that actually matter when it comes to deciding the election, because everything else is just basically a foregone conclusion. Here you've got Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin as the 4 that really matter. And then you've got your tilts and leans. That is fascinating. That's really just down to...
Well, I hate to say it, but when it comes to a presidential race, my friends from Texas, Oklahoma, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, you don't count. You are literally just a piggy bank. That's it. They're just there to take your money. Because when it comes to electoral college vote, they already know which way you're going to go. Like, you yell at me later, but that is just a fundamental reality of 270 to win. In order to be president of the United States, it's not a popularity contest. Otherwise, you'd have a whole different result right now. You're right, it is a 270 to win. You need 270 electoral college votes. Democrats start out at 247 out of 270 to win. Republicans start out at 235. You need 270 to win. Start doing the math. Where are you going to go to get these numbers? Sure, we could have Michigan maybe in play. Republicans always like to say Minnesota's in play. Mm-hmm. Democrats like to say this is the year, in certain places. Florida's gone. Can North Carolina happen? In the end,
every year, Democrats say that. I'm a Texan,
right.
So every
Texas
year
Senate.
There's about 50 articles about this is going to be the year, and it's never.
Okay.
It is literally never the year.
To make up for it to my fellow Texans, inside jokes, Democrats will win statewide when Ann Richards comes back and runs again. It's going to be a long long time till that happens. So it's really difficult in some of these states. So let's go look at your combination. You're at 235, you need 270 to win. What's my combination to make this work? I need a big state. I need a Pennsylvania. I need those 19. Then you start adding on, okay, I'll probably maybe need 3 in order to get there if I'm a Trump that's running. If you're a Democrat, could you pull it off at 2? These are the number games that they're playing right now. In the end, I think Pennsylvania is going to be the one that comes down and decides the fate of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. and the presidency. If you look at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, look at how many numbers are at stake there and the trend lines. I mean, Republican Party is a mess right now in Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona. Democrats are done in places like Ohio. So it really just comes down to these 4 states are really just going to be hit and hit real hard, at least from what we're seeing.
And that just means those poor people are just going to be inundated.
So
with
move to
political-
Texas, Oklahoma,
Yeah.
California.
Get your stuff right now. Get an Airbnb. No, but yeah, that's crazy when you think about it.
It really is going to come down to that. And we can maybe, you want to preempt the question of what about the primary race?
Yeah, I mean, okay, and we
race.
didn't even put in a slide on this, but of who we think is likely to be the candidate, but that is the question that everybody wants to know. So on the Democratic side, I think we all know, Biden's running again. There was some, I think, discussion that maybe he would go for 1 term and then bow out. There didn't emerge, I think, from the wings a suitable replacement in his team's estimation. So he will be at the top of the ticket, holding on to that. That really, to me, is not a surprise. I mean, anybody who's ever had any association with Biden throughout his long history in politics knows that that man has wanted to be president. I think that was unlikely he was going to give that up. So he'll be at the top of the ticket on the Democratic side for sure. Which then takes you, and some people have asked me already, does the Kennedy campaign, have legs? What the role would that be? Of course, announced as a Democrat, now running as an independent. I mean, anytime you have a third-party candidate, it's a factor. He can pull votes away. His name gives him more popularity than he might otherwise have. But is he going to be a major player? I would say probably not, but a third-party candidate is always disruptive.
Especially in places like Nevada, elsewhere. But no, it's going to be Trump. Trump's up by 50 points. That's historical numbers. It is going to be him. We never really had much thought that it'd be DeSantis or anybody else. So you are looking at Trump-Biden.
So I hear you saying we didn't have much thought that it was going to be DeSantis.
I didn't. I've been on stage
I know
on record
you
against that
didn't,
guy
but
for a
I am
while.
saying that people thought
Sure.
that DeSantis had a chance, but
People
he
like
really
shiny objects.
flamed out.
I'm sorry. There's not much. Once you get past the shine and there's not much depth there, then
Yeah.
where are you going?
Yeah.
He was a one-trick pony focused on just culture wars like it's the 1990s. And that doesn't work in a general election.
Yeah.
He said Donald Trump had a message. Hillary Clinton did not. She was just, I am not Donald Trump, and you see what happened. You've got to be for
DeSantis' problem was the opposite. He was like, I am Donald Trump, and everybody was like, you, sir, are a knockoff Donald Trump, and that is not the same.
Right.
But that he's flamed out. So now, without that, I don't know. I don't know who would be the likely.
My grandmother lived to 101. She says, live life as it is, not as it should be. And folks, that's what you're going to be voting for next year. It is going to be what you have. Absent a major health issue to either of them, those will be the top of the ticket. Okay.
Yeah.
Donald Trump will not be in jail by then. Donald Trump will never go to jail. If he is at the federal level, Biden will commute him. He will not pardon him. He will commute him if it ever would get to that point. They are both going to be on the ticket. That is going to be a fact. At this point, it seems inevitable. And we will be right here talking about this in a year from now.
It really does seem inevitable.
And
Oh, wow. Somebody told us, we were at the reception last night, somebody told me, so we searched the whole country, and this is what we've got. And I was like, and I fear that we did not search.
they're going to be a combined 157 years old. This country's
That's
not even a
So
50 yet.
depressing.
That's
Oh
just-
my God, that's so
I'll
depressing.
leave it there.
Okay,
Can't
but
do better.
I'm going to leave this last slide up here. I don't think we will speak to it other than to say that politics is really just politics until it's policy. So it does matter who wins the election. It does matter who ends up in office because you do have a number of important issues on the table, and the people who are in those offices really matter. If you want to talk more about politics, you know you do. We have a reception this evening. This is the PAC reception. The PAC is the fund that One Voice uses to participate in advocacy activities in DC. We will be talking about politics, we'll be talking about policy, and it is an opportunity to support the industry and the work of the One Voice Government Affairs team. There are some logistical components to that.
There's unions in the late 70s put in a rule, so in order to enter the room, we just have to have your signature that allows us to even talk about the PAC. So I can't even go any further than what Caitlin and I just did to tell you that an event's happening. In order to learn more about it, you actually have to just sign your name. It does not commit you to giving any money. It just allows you to walk in the room and hear more and talk about politics and hopefully enjoy a beverage and network with your colleagues. So please encourage you to come this evening, 5 o'clock in the Tennessee room. We'll be there, be able to answer a lot more questions that I'm sure we raised today. And I know we're running out of time, so really appreciate you having us today. Time for questions? I think we're done.
Got time probably for one quick question.
One, who wants to be the lucky one?
One lucky question.
We do enough damage to you all today, as we have in the past.
All right, then we're going to cut it off.
Thank you very much.
Great job.
Appreciate having us.
I told you they were fun, right?
One of us,
right?
half of us.
Great job, guys. So make sure you check out that PAC reception at 5 o'clock and pepper them with more questions. Right now, we're going to break into some of our roundtable discussions. So we'll jump into the roundtable discussions. Then at 3:35. All right, 3:35, we're going to come back in here, and we're going to do something really cool. We're going to organize some bags and pack some bags for toys for children in a pediatric hospital. All right? So please, at 3:35, come back in this room. Let's do something good together. Let's pack some toys. It's all for a nonprofit, Riley Hospital for Children. We'll have someone here to actually talk about this nonprofit and charity. There will be snacks and beverages and whatnot as well. So please enjoy the roundtables back here at 3:35. See you then.
Midnight at the oasis, send your camel to bed. Shadows painting our faces, traces of romance in our heads. Heaven's holding a half moon, shining just for us. Let's slip off to a sand dune real soon. Kick up a little dust. Come on, cactus is our friend. He'll point out the way. Come on, till the evening ends. Till the evening ends. You don't have to answer. There's no need to speak. I'll be your belly dancer, prancer, and you can be my sheep. sweet girls to attend him. They all send him a jump bags, beck and call. But you won't need no harem, honey, when I'm by your side. And you won't need no camel, no, no, when I take you for a ride. Come on, Cactus is our friend. He'll point out the way. Come on, till the evening ends, till the evening ends. Midnight at the oasis, sing your camel to bed. Got shadows painting our faces and traces, a romance in our head. Oh, come on. Oh, come on. Ooh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Caught up in wheels of fortune while you've been asleep. Come on, give it up. You got what's coming to you. No use for you to struggle. Now you're in too deep. It's gonna be a long, long time before it's through. Changing wheels of fortune, driving us on and on. Winning, sometimes losing. As soon as it's here, it's gone. I'm so tired of losing, but I still play the game. And I know there's no reason till I go on searching, just the same. Well, I've kicked around your city, seen your vanity, Mr. Society. Can you hear me? Take your satisfaction and you cover all the action, but your loaded dice won't help you in the end. And you can hear 'em calling, changing wheels of fortune, driving us on and on. Winning, sometimes losing. As soon as it's here, it's gone. So tired of losing, but I still play the game. And I know